Alright, so we got a 2007 Chevy Cobalt in here with a 2.2 regular sedan. He said when he goes over bumps, it wants to cut out or die, and then it comes right back. And the check engine light's on. He said it had the PO420, which is low efficiency for the catalytic converter. I scanned it and actually get my scan tool real quick. I actually got 3 codes on it. I'm not sure if it's gonna. Got the PO420, the PO336, and the PO341. The 336 is the crankshaft position, and the 341 is the intake camshaft position. Then you have the 420 catalyst low efficiency. So my first thought, I'm going to ignore the 420 right now because it's possible it needs a catalytic converter, and it's probably because of the 336. It's got the 336 and the 341, and the 336 is your crankshaft position sensor, and the 341 is your intake camshaft sensor. And I'm going to focus on the 336 because I believe that since that works in unison with the 341, the 336 is your main signal, and the 341 is kind of the computer tells it where the intake's supposed to open the actuator on it. So the 336, I think, is the main issue with it, and 341 is kind of a symptom after you know it's the cause. The 336 is causing the 341. Is what I'm trying to say. So what he said, it was hitting bumps. Originally, I thought it was the ground wires on the transmissions. These Cobalts are notorious for that. I've chased problems on these Cobalts. Well, when I first started working on these Cobalts, when they came out and started having these issues, I would chase all kinds of gremlins with them. And I learned that the ground on the transmission for the engine ground goes bad all the time on, or it corrodes and has issues, and it can cause all kinds of 5-volt reference problems when that ground goes bad or starts deteriorating. And that's when he said he was hitting bumps and it was doing that. I originally thought, okay, he's got a bad ground on the transmission, and that's causing the issue because this Cobalt is very, very common on these. If you have any kind of issue where it's coming and going, or you're having problems with the Cobalt going into limp mode, first thing I always check on these is that ground going to the transmission. There's about 3 wires, and they all go into a big eyelet and go on the transmission there. I'll show you where that's at. That's not the problem on this. I believe I found the problem on this already. So we'll go over to the car real quick and take a look at it. It's kind of hard to grab a hold of the end of it where it's at because it's underneath that housing. See that right there? Hit it once, twice. Right there. Look at that. See that? Almost wants to die. Right there, it almost died. Right there, it almost died. So I believe the harness is bad, or going bad. And I might go ahead and change the sensor too while I'm in there. I'm going to see what's available for it. But if you manipulate that harness enough, you know, you can see the engine try to die. It starts to die and stumble. So you can see why if you're going down the road and you hit a bump, why he would lose power for a little bit, or it tries to die. So on these, it's easier just to jack it up underneath and remove the starter to get to the crankshaft sensor. So I think the crankshaft sensor is not too terribly expensive on this. I don't think, we're going to look at that harness real close to see if we can find anything on it. Hopefully they have it in stock, and then we'll change that harness for sure. And I may change the crank sensor while I'm in there just because it's not that expensive in the car. I'm going to have it all part anyway. I don't know, that's kind of a gamble because sometimes you get the aftermarket parts. If I change it with the OEM, even with the OEM nowadays, I'm having trouble with those sensors, so I might leave the sensor in there and just change the harness But I'm gonna open the harness up and see if I can figure out what's going on with it closer, and see if it's available. So hopefully that picked it up on the camera. When I was manipulating that harness, the engine was really stumbling and starting to die. So we'll go from there on that and see what they have available, and then we'll come back. Alright, so to remove the starter, go ahead and disconnect your battery in the trunk, 10mm on the ground. Take that loose, and then you're going to add this 15mm bolt right here. And then there's one back in here where you can't see it. I'll try to see. What did I do? I have my tool set up already. Oh, it's already up there. So this is what I got up there. I got a deep well 15, a 3-inch extension, and then a stubby extension. You could probably come up with some kind of combination. You can't get a real long extension back there just because you know, you got the dipsticks too, everything here. So you're just going to go and break those two loose. I'm actually going to try to leave this one connected to the wiring because it looks very corroded, especially that solenoid wire. I don't want to break that solenoid and have to call and tell me it's a starter. So I'm going to try to just move this out of the way a little bit without disconnecting it. And alright, so that's the first bolt that you can't see. And it stayed up there. That's fine. And then you got this second bolt here. And then the starter should come out. Kind of corroded on there a little bit. So you can see it comes out. I'm just going to kind of hang it here. I don't want to disturb that that wiring on the starter because it looks pretty corroded. So I'm going to change my angle of the camera, and then I'll show you where this crank sensor is at. You can see I got my 8mm socket and ratchet on it, and I'm just turning it out. I'm going to go ahead and move it. So here's the sensor right here and the bolt. You're just going to remove this 8mm bolt, and then your sensor should slide out. You may have to get a little screwdriver or something, just kind of pry on a little bit. You don't want to break it off into there, but you may have to pry on just a hair and kind of rock it back and forth. So I'm going to go ahead and take the rest of this bolt out, and then we'll pull that sensor up. Alright, so this is what I got going here. The harness just comes off, and this end goes, it's close to the fan, just unplug it, and then you got this end going to the sensor. Sensor's here, it just slides out. I did have to use a small screwdriver and kind of pry it out a little bit. Just be careful, you don't want to break this off in the block, and then you're going to have all kinds of issues, be drilling and trying to put something in there to pull it out. But it comes out, just has a little rubber seal here. So honestly, when I was messing with it, I could not really narrow it down to what the issue is on it. If it's one of the, I don't see anything with the wires, so I think it's a pin issue either on this connector or this connector. At first I was kind of messing with this and it would stumble a little bit, and then I would wiggle this over here and it would stumble. Or is it something inside the sensor? You know, you're moving the pins just enough to lose connection for a split second. I'm not really sure. I couldn't really be definitive on it because it seemed like it was moving around a little bit. All I know is when I would mess with this, the car would stumble and have an issue. If I left it alone, it was fine. It'd sit there and run for as long as you want it to. So it's in this area here. I don't think it's on this end coming from the car. I checked that out real good. I took it off. I looked at the pins. Everything looked really good on that. There's no issues there. So I believe it's on this side. It's either in this connector or in the sensor itself. When you just move it just right, it moves the pin just enough to lose connection. So I'm going to go ahead and replace both these parts. I'm seeing both ends of these, but not the whole harness at O'Reilly's. And I found an AC Delco crank sensor. It's pretty reasonable. So I'm going to try to track down the right harness for this and then go from there. So once I get the parts, we'll put it back in. Alright, so this is what I came up with. I got a new AC Delco crank sensor here. I got it pretty reasonable. And I actually, I couldn't find the wiring harness aftermarket. I'm sure if I went to the dealer or something, but I wanted to get it done. And so anyway, I went to the junkyard and got a new harness. And I made sure I got it off a car that was wrecked. This is the old harness. And like I said about this one, this is the end that goes to the wiring harness in the car. And if I wiggle the wires real hard on that end, nothing happens. The car runs fine. It's only when I wiggle the wires on this side of the harness, and I still wasn't able to pinpoint where the problem was. So I don't know if a pin is moving around inside here on this end, or if maybe the pin on the crank sensor end is bad. I'm not sure. I couldn't really narrow it down. I just know that if I would manipulate this, the car would try to die. So instead of just replacing one or the other and hoping for the best, went to the junkyard and got this. And I got it off a wreck car. If you go to the junkyard and get parts, always try, if you go, say you're going to get a transmission, you don't want to get a transmission off a car that looks like it's in perfect shape. That's what I'm trying to say. So this car was wrecked pretty good. It looked like it had been running fine until it was wrecked pretty good. So I grabbed this. The harness is still in pretty good shape. You can see the protector is still on it. On this harness, the protector was on it, part of it, but it was all ripped up and torn. So anyway, I found the best one I could at the junkyard. Got this one. And I got the new sensor. It's AC Delco. I always recommend trying to get the factory OEM parts for your car, because a lot of these aftermarket parts are not that good, and I've had a lot of problems with crank sensors especially failing. I will say though that I've even had problems with some of the factory parts, so it's just the nature of the beast at this point with these parts. But anyway, that's all I'll say about that. So we'll go ahead and install this. Just put a little oil around your seal and slide it in, and put your 8mm. This one came with the bolt. We're just going to put the 8mm bolt back in, tighten it up, and then we'll plug this new harness in, do the starter, and then we'll start it up, make sure it's not cutting out or doing anything weird, and then we'll ship it out. So pretty straightforward on these. I'll get back to it, and we'll film what we do, or what I do. Alright, so I went ahead and put that sensor back in, 8mm, tightened it up. On these starters, the top one's hard to get to and kind of hard. You can't see it from underneath here. So what I always do is just start the top bolt. I put it through the starter with my socket first on the top one, and then put the starter up there and kind of line it up and turn that top one a few turns before I even worry about the bottom one. That way you're not sitting there trying to go in blindly, trying to find the hole blindly, and messing around with it for a period of time. Just get the bolt, slide it through the starter first, and then line that one up first. Put your socket against it so it holds it, and then just start turning it, and eventually it'll grab. And once you get a few turns on it, you can start the bottom one. So that's my little tip on getting these T2 starters back up there easier than just trying to fight it and trying to look for it blindly. Alright, so I just plugged it in down here. Don't forget your little gray plastic retainer. It kind of helps it from coming unplugged if something would happen. I mean, it shouldn't come unplugged either way, but just slide that back in there. Once you connect the connector, you take that gray retainer clip and just slide it in. So I'm going to go ahead and hook the battery back up and start it up, and we'll see if this thing stumbles when I mess around with the wires again. I'm assuming it's not going to, but you never know. We'll test it out before we take it on a test drive. And before I take it out, I will do a crankshaft variation relearn on this. If you have a good scan tool, you should be able to run that yourself, and it just helps the computer relearn the crankshaft sensor. So I'm going to go ahead and run that real quick, and then we'll take it for a test drive. Alright, so I got the battery hooked up. I'm just going to grab that harness like I did last time and see if we have any issues. Like I said before, I don't expect to have any problems, but not having any issues now. I'm going to go take it for a test drive real quick. Put the scan tool back up to it and make sure it's fixed, but I believe it's fixed. I'm almost 100% sure. So I'll take it for a test drive, and then we'll talk about the wiring a little bit and then end this video out. So I'm going to go take it for a ride, and I'll be right back. Alright, so I just drove about 30 minutes. Tried to take it over as many bumpy roads as I could. He was saying that, when you hit bumps is when it would cut out the most. And that makes sense because when you wiggle the wires, it would cut out. So, like I said, I drove about 30 miles, and there's no codes coming back. My guess is the catalytic converter code, the 420, we'll probably come back on it eventually. I don't think that had anything to do with the problem he was having as far as cutting out stuff. I got a feeling that's going to come back on him, and but I think I wouldn't have wiggled those wires right off the bat. But whenever someone, that's part of being a mechanic or diagnosing a car, is listen to what they're saying. He said, whenever he hit bumps, when it would really cut out. And with my experience and stuff, I automatically thought it was that ground on the transmission. That's a pretty common thing on these, real common. I've seen it many times, and it ended up not being that. And that's when I went to the scan tool and see what that said. And it gave me that crankshaft and the camshaft codes, and then that's when I decided if it hitting bumps, maybe there's something going on with the crankshaft sensor, and you wiggle the wires, and that's what happens. You gotta be careful when you wiggle wires. Sometimes you can fix things without actually trying to fix them, and then you can't get it to redo it. But I felt pretty confident it was something in the crankshaft sensor, either the sensor itself or the wiring. So I went ahead and wiggled it, and then I was able to recreate the problem right here in the garage. So it's something to think about. Sometimes you can accidentally fix the problem too with wiggling things around. So it's always good to do the wiggle test when you have an electrical problem like that, but make sure you're ready for it and you don't, the right time for it. So anyway, that's just one of the diagnostic things. Some of the simplest things in the world can fix these problems, and a wiggle test has been around a long time, and it's always a good thing to try out once you've narrowed the problem down. Like I said, I wish I could have recreated it and figured out which end it was, or if it was the sensor itself. But I wasn't going to take any chances. I don't want to just change the sensor and then it comes back, for the same problem. So I believe it's in one of those pigtails on the connector, and it didn't make sense to just buy each end and then O'Reilly's, those guys, they all had the end they just had the end connector for the sensor itself, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense just to buy that and not the other end, because it was doing it on both ends. I could kind of get it to do it, so I wanted to change both ends anyway. So in this case, it's just easier to go to the junkyard and get it than it would be to go to the dealer and have to order it and wait for it. And I'm not even sure I'm sure they had it, but I didn't even ask because I didn't want to wait. So anyway, I guess that's about it. This thing's fixed. Like I said, I drove about 30 minutes, went over as many bumps as I could, and never missed a beat. So I think he's good to go. I do think that 420 will come back, but that'll just be something to have to deal with down the road. Maybe it won't come back. I feel like it will, but we'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching, and as always, God bless.